This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity Podcast. On the podcast, we do short business episodes, short private equity episodes. We often do short profiles of leaders. This is one of those coming up, and then interviews with private equity and business leaders of all sorts. Today's discussion is really about Stephen Schwarzman and Blackstone, 6 key points. And I'll start with number one. For people that don't know this, Stephen Schwarzman and Pierre Pedersen really kicked off the private equity business for all practical purposes in a big way in 1995. At the time, there were a couple of the big firms were getting started, the KKRs of the world and so forth. Ultimately, I mean, our second point here, besides Schwarzman co-founding Blackstone in 1995, is that today Blackstone, number two, has grown to have about $1 trillion assets under management and is the largest of the alternative asset funds and firms, private credit, leveraged buyouts, private equity, huge real estate. Of course, he is no longer the CEO of Blackstone, but led it for so long and was such the driver behind it that I think it's always interesting to revisit Stephen Schwarzman and what he's done. So the first 2 points are co-founder 1995, now $1 trillion under assets. Third, the stock this year relatively weak compared to where Apollo's at and where KKR's at. It's down about 4.5% year to date. So itself not having a great year this year in the public markets. But again, it's the biggest private equity fund and fund of companies. It faces lots of the headwinds that have been struggling in private equity and a lot of money to deploy. Fourth, his personal net worth now about $39 billion plus. That was a couple months ago. It's probably $40 to $50 billion now. But in any event, he's done really well. A fifth note on Stephen Schwarzman and Blackstone, you'll note that he himself is a Yale graduate, then a Harvard Business graduate. He's written a great book about his career that I think is worth reading, and it's inspiring and enjoyable. I've read his biography. I've read Bob Iger's biography. I find Schwarzman's to be much less bragging about everything he did and more instructive and inspiring than Bob Iger's of Disney, where I find just a little bit of the arrogance runs a little bit amok, where I did love reading Schwarzman's biography. The sixth thing I'll note, and this number also has probably gone way up, he's given away $700 to $800 in educational and cultural charities, a big supporter of charities. And again, it's hard to judge these numbers today when a person has a net worth of $40 billion plus, whether $700 million or $1 billion is the right number or not. But in any event, for all the different issues out there, he's really the driven founder of what is Blackstone, which grew to be the largest alternative asset manager, private equity sort of fund company in the world, and now publicly traded, again, down about 5% this year, but managing $1 trillion in assets. I hope you enjoy this. If there's anybody you'd ever like to hear about or hear his profile, please feel free to text Scott Becker at 773-766-5322. In between us and our research team, Cosette Benjamin, Chanel Bunger, we'll figure it out and love to make sure we're responsive to the audience. Thank you for listening to the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Thank you very much.